Welcome back to this Season 13, Episode 14 of the Ubuntu podcast. I am joined by two of my very best friends. Stuart Langridge, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you for having me back on. Very kind of you.
Thanks very much for making a return appearance. And Mark, how the devil are you?
I am the devil himself, thank you.
Would you like to know what we're going to be discussing today?
Oh, go on then.
We have had so much feedback, and some of it along common lines. We've got a deep dive into some of the feedback that we've got. We've got a command line love from Stuart, and then we've got regular feedback. So it's a bumper discussion section today. But until we get to that, Mark, what have you been up to recently?
I have been playing Command & Conquer.
Really?
Really.
Did we not speak about this recently?
We spoke about Electronic Arts putting some source code for it on GitHub. Yes.
I thought that was, they put the source code for the version that came out in like 1994 or whatever it is. Is that the version you're playing?
Well, I'm playing the remastered collection, which is essentially a graphical uplift on top of the 1994 version.
Are you playing this on your Switch?
No, I'm playing this on my Steam box.
A 286? Weren't you like 1 year old when this came out or something?
Sure, why not? Bit older than that. I did play this actually on a Windows 95 PC back in the day.
Nice.
I remember the sequel I wasn't old enough to buy in Woolworths, so I had to get my friend to buy it for me.
That dates you, Mark. Woolworths references.
So this has been, the graphics have been remastered, so presumably they've rebuilt the game as well. You're not playing it in DOSBox or something.
I'm not playing it in DOSBox, no. I'm playing it. So there isn't a Linux release of this. So I'm playing this through Steam using Proton, which meant I came across something interesting. When I was talking about building my Steam box on a previous episode, I mentioned that I had to install a package to get the Vulkan drivers because they're not installed by default. And the game I was running, which was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, told me this and gave me instructions. Well, when I came to run Command & Conquer, it just sort of died. So I reported a bug on the issue tracker for Proton, and someone said, looked up the log I posted and said, you need the 32-bit Vulkan drivers because all of Wine runs in 32-bit mode. So I had to go and install an additional package with i386 on the end, and everything started working and it runs perfectly.
Presumably there are a bunch of Vulkan people out there in the universe saying, why do we need 32-bit Vulkan drivers? Is this not like trying to find a thing that lets me plug my NVIDIA card into the 286 I was talking about? Either you're running 32-bit on some kind of old machine, or you're running Vulkan on a new machine, right? Surely there shouldn't be this kind of crossover.
Well, Valve have had quite a hand in the Mesa drivers, particularly for AMD, which I'm running. And this is one of their big use cases, I suppose, for having stuff running on Linux, is that they want people to be able to run Windows games in Wine. So, that's why this kind of thing is necessary, because generally speaking, Wine will run in 32-bit mode.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You can run Wine in 64-bit mode if you want to, and you need to, and I have done it for a couple of games in the past, but the sort of default is that it still runs in 32-bit.
But surely all the games on Windows are 64-bit now. Aren't they?
I'm not confident of that.
Am I a naive child for asking this question? Are Windows games all still 32-bit?
Well, there's a whole historic library of Windows games which are still 32-bit, certainly.
True, don't get me wrong, but those get run in kind of emulation or whatever, in the same way that 32-bit applications do, surely.
Well, when you're running Wine, you're running it on, you've got to run the 32-bit applications on 32-bit Wine. Modern games, I've honestly, I don't know enough about Windows software to know. All I know is that it works and it requires those drivers.
Fair enough. Far be it from me to question. I don't know. The most complicated thing I play is, Sudoku. So don't really need good graphics for that.
But it is 64-bit, Stuart, your Sudoku game.
It's 9 bits. There's just 9 numbers.
Right. Well, with that, shall we get on with it? So the main segment today is a bumper feedback segment. The last couple of shows where we've had some discussion about snaps and rolling releases have generated quite some feedback from you. So we thought in order to do it justice, we'd address those particular topics in a bit more detail. So first up, we had some feedback from William Smith and Jason Armstrong, who wanted to know what all the fuss was about.
Could you please explain what the whole issue with snaps is with the pushback for Mint and other distributions? So what Mint actually say is applications in the Snap Store can't be patched or pinned. You can't audit them, hold them, modify them, or even point to a different Snap Store. You've got as much empowerment with this as if you were using proprietary software, i.e. none. And this is in effect similar to a commercial proprietary solution, but with two major differences. It runs as root and it installs itself without asking you.
Okay. So the first piece here, it says that applications in the Snap Store cannot be patched. I'm not sure what that's referring. So do you two want to give me your interpretation of what that means?
The way that these arguments were presented, I think, and I alluded to this when we had this discussion before, I think these are being presented as though this is an explanation of why it's bad for users. But I think that really this is, from a distro maintainer's point of view, is that they're saying that they can't apply their own patches to whichever package is a snap for running on Mint.
Yes.
That's my interpretation of this.
My interpretation of them not being patchable is precisely that.
Okay.
If they wanted to fork the Chromium package and stick, -mint on the end of the version number and make some changes to make it fit better into the Mint environment, they can't do that if what you deliver them is a great big binary blob, which is what Snap is.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I agree with that, and that's by design. In the same way that, app stores on the major mobile platforms behave in that way. This was an effort to put the publisher in control of their application publishing pipeline, and also to scale beyond a small group of enthusiasts that publish tens of thousands of packages in distribution archives, because there are millions of applications in the mobile stores and they are not packaged by volunteers and enthusiastic users. They are packaged by the developers and the publishers. So it's, an effort to leverage that kind of model.
I think this speaks to a fundamental divide between two different groups of people. One of them is a lot larger than the other. One of them is that the people who build software should be able to dictate how it works on your machine because they know best about it. And the other one is that the people who built the software don't know best about it, and anyone should be able to take it and patch it and then deliver that onto their own users. And you can make arguments for both sides of that, and there are people on both sides of that argument. If you look at, say, X Screensaver, Jamie Zawinski has said, Debian, please stop packaging this.
Nextcloud did the same as well.
You're not staying up to my changes. Nextcloud is saying exactly the same thing. But equally, Chromium is open source, and if the thing is open source but you're delivering a snap, then they have no option but to say, okay, Mint users, you get the version that Ubuntu have decided you get, and there's nothing we can do about that, without saying we're not going to have you install the snap.
Now, it is possible, by maybe another name, to patch snaps. Some snaps, let's say, but in the case of Chromium, I can download the Snapcraft YAML for Chromium and I can build it locally, and I can patch that YAML in order to change Chromium, and I can install that locally built version of Chromium. So in some cases you can, patch things, but I agree that it is not the distro patching sort of approach that you've been describing. It's a patching it from a user perspective.
Yeah, and attempting to describe that as patching is kind of sophistry on the grounds that then you can patch literally anything as long as you can download the source code and build it yourself. That's not a patch, that's a replacement.
Fair enough.
That's not necessarily suggesting that that's a bad option, and maybe they should do that, but that's not patching. Yeah. They also say that snaps can't be pinned,
which they can. It's called deferring.
That's not what pinning is. Pinning means I want this version, and you are not to touch it. It does not mean I would like to put off the thing so it doesn't upgrade at 4 a.m. It means I've got this version, never upgrade it. I know better than you do about which version should run on my computer. And as far as I'm aware, you can't do that. You can put off a Snap upgrade, but you can't tell Snap, I don't care about your opinion, do not upgrade this thing. And again, that's by design, right?
Right.
And I agree with the design, but there are a bunch of people who do not want Snap to upgrade packages unless they explicitly say so.
So that's true. So it is by design because security is a principal design philosophy for snaps. And we don't want stale software, as is the case right now. Is there's an astonishing number of people running Ubuntu, both server and desktop, who simply disable all updates. So, very quickly they fall behind on all of the security updates that are constantly being churned out by the security team.
That is very alarming.
Yeah, it's an alarmingly high number as well. I'm not going to reveal what it is, but it's much bigger than you think. And so snaps update automatically in order to maintain the security profile of that application and the device as a whole. Now, there is a mechanism, if you are an enterprise user, to pin apps, not just to defer the updates, but to elect what version of a snap you want to be on your fleet of machines, and you don't want that to change until you expressly elect what other version you want to replace that across your fleet. And that's done with the enterprise store proxy, but that is for enterprises who want to, operate that kind of capability. It's not for consumers of the general version of Ubuntu.
And to a first approximation, everyone on Earth running Chromium is not an enterprise.
Right.
So the intersection between those two things is basically zero. I think, from my perspective as a bit of an outsider looking at this conversation, there is a legitimate point about enterprises not wanting to upgrade things and everything. But I think there's also an awful lot of disingenuous complaining using that as a fig leaf when it's actually, I basically don't like snaps. Mm-hmm. And this is a stick to beat snaps with. There is a legitimate point there about not being able to pin things. And I go backwards and forwards on this in my head, but I do feel like if you could just say, okay, fine, you want to pin it, we're not going to stop you. We're going to make you do this complicated thing. But if you do the complicated thing, then they're pinned. It would make that go away. The problem is whether it's actually going to stop people or whether they'll just look for a different stick.
But then from the developer's point of view, then they lose one of the main things, which is everyone's always running the up-to-date version.
Agreed. But the only people who aren't are people who are busy complaining about this stuff, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of a tiny fraction of a percent. Mm-hmm. They've just got loud voices and occasionally do YouTube videos about the devil. Like this is not significantly going to impact your usage figures.
Yeah, and publishers really value the short tail of releases that are out in the wild when they publish a snap.
Yeah,
because within hours of them publishing the newest version, it's like within 12 hours, 90% of the users of that software have got the latest version, and they love that. So, that's a powerful feature.
Yeah. So the next point is you can't audit them, hold them, modify them, or even point snap at a different store, which I think is 3 different points. You can't hold them is the thing we just talked about.
Yes.
Unless there's a distinction between holding and pinning that I don't understand. That, I think, is the thing we've already talked about. You can't audit them or modify them. It's basically nothing to do with them being snaps. It's to do with them being proprietary. You can't audit or modify Steam either.
Right.
But you can audit or modify Chromium.
Yes. Yeah. But you can't audit or modify the version of Chromium that you get in the Snap.
Well, when you say you can't audit it, there's a couple of things there. So you can audit what snapd does on your system with a command snap changes, which will tell you everything that it's been up to, and then you can dig into that on a snap-by-snap basis to see when it was updated, the versions that it moved between. In terms of auditing them, they're just a squashfs file that gets mounted and it is uncompressed. It's just a directory of stuff. You can go in there and look at every single file. You can enumerate every file in there. You can see what it is. You cannot modify them because that's the whole point. They're, read only.
But that's what I meant about it being proprietary. I mean, you only get the binaries, but then you only get the binaries from Debian packages as well. Yes,
Yeah.
you can download the source, but until
And
reproduce
rebuild it, yeah.
until reproducible builds happen, you can't actually know that the source it was built from is the binary that you got. And you're in exactly the same position with the Chromium snap. I'm assuming it's all published, the source for it and the YAML file and so on. So you can order that just as much as you can a Debian package. I don't know if there's any plan to do reproducible builds for snaps, but that sounds like an awful lot of work.
Yeah. And, you'd only be able to do that in some realms. There are a number of different ways that you can build snaps. I could just build it here on my own. We can control some of that machinery to add some reproducibility there. As we can in the build services that exist either in Launchpad or integrated with GitHub, or there's this self-hosted build service now called Fabrica. It would be possible to implement that, but we've got bigger issues to solve that, developers and publishers are asking for. So, we'll get there someday, but it's not at the top of the list for sure right now.
I feel like doing that is not going to convince anyone who's making this complaint anyway. The final one, which is a thing that I personally actually agree with, is you can't point Snap at a different store.
You cannot. There's no longer answer to that. Again, it's the whole paradigm. The mobile app stores, there is Google Play, there's the Apple App Store. That's where you get your stuff from. This is one of the most powerful things that developers and publishers like, because there is a single place. It is where they can find their audience, and their audience can find the software. So it's a familiar paradigm for publishers and developers, and it's helped bring a number of people writing software in a cross-platform nature, so Electron applications being one example, who can quite trivially bring their applications to the Linux desktop and publish it in a way that is familiar to them, because this is how they publish their apps for the other platforms in a similar sort of way. Now, the other side of this is we didn't arrive at a single store by accident. We've got there by way of doing PPAs for the last 13 years, of which there are over 170,000 PPAs. So good luck with the discovery on that. It was never invented to be a means to do software distribution. It accidentally became that. It was intended to be a way for developers to prepare their packages for inclusion in the next release of Ubuntu. But because getting your software through the gates into the archive, it became a sidestep. Instead of actually getting your software in the distribution, people just started using PPAs as a means to work around that, bit of policy. So yeah, there's a ton of PPAs. And here's an interesting little fact for you. I'm not going to tell you what this PPA is, but the single most popular PPA that exists, the one that is hit more than any other PPA on a daily basis, is empty. There's nothing in it.
Yep.
It was deleted some years ago.
I believe that, actually. But I grant you the point, and all of that's true, and PPAs needed to go away, and yes, they were not meant to be a thing for software distribution, and they ended up being that way, and people did absolutely avoid putting their apps into the archive where normal people could get at them in favor of using a PPA giving you a bunch of complicated instructions. Agreed with all of that point. What I don't like about the there's only one store is you are obliged to trust Canonical. You have no choice in the matter. And I'm fine with that if snaps are a thing. You say, this is a canonical thing. It's not an Ubuntu thing. It's a canonical thing. You got to trust us. You don't trust us. Don't come to us for this. No problem. But Mint's opinion is we don't necessarily want to trust Canonical.
Sorry.
We will get to the point I suspect you're about to make in a second, because I agree with you, Mr. Johnson. We'll get to that. But I think Canonical putting themselves in a position of now you have to trust us. Some years back, Mark made an offhand comment, which I thought was quite humorous, which was that you have to trust us, we've got root. And it was the truth. But it still blew up into a huge furore. Again, by people looking for a stick to beat Canonical with, but nonetheless because people don't like being reminded of that, and there only being one Snap store kind of perpetuates that.
It's only one archive.
the reason that I giggled there, which is probably quite obvious, is that it seems pretty clear to me that Mint have already chosen to trust Canonical because they already pull everything from the Ubuntu archive.
And that's what I think is interesting. To me, it seems extremely disingenuous, extremely hostile, bad-tempered, however you want to describe it, to, on the one hand, say, well, we don't want Canonical to be able to do this, we're in control of our own destiny, while simultaneously pointing their users at Canonical's archives. If Mint ran their own archives, dealt with all the bandwidth for that, dealt with the update procedures, managed the archives when they went down, managed the influx of new packages into it, then fine, do what you like. But from my point of view, it seems extremely unpleasant to take advantage of, well, I was going to say Ubuntu's generosity, but frankly, since we're talking about money here, Canonical's generosity in running the Ubuntu archives while simultaneously complaining about the way that that's operated.
Mm-hmm.
I have a slight side point to this. If I was, for example, to build a snap package and stick it on my website, if someone was to download that on Ubuntu, they could just run it like that, could they not?
Yes, you can sideload, yeah.
As long as they don't care about ever getting updates.
Yes.
Right. But I could, in theory, build some sort of application that downloads snaps from some repository. And basically what I'm thinking of is I could make F-Droid for snaps, which is a free software app store for Android, which downloads and installs APKs.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is in fact possible. Snaps aren't tied to running on the Snap Store. They're being downloaded from the Snap Store. If people cared about this enough and wanted to be able to run snaps, they could do that and have any number of repositories. That's a possibility.
And I think that would be an interesting angle. But I've not heard anyone who's busy complaining about this propose that someone builds F-Droid.
No.
Because the situations are exactly analogous as far as I can tell. There is one Google Play Store and that's it. And if you don't want to put your apps in it or you're not allowed to put your apps in it for whatever reason, someone built an alternative which downloads APKs and installs them as a separate store. It itself is a package in that store. Other packages are in that store and you can use them. I've got F-Droid on my phone. I haven't only got F-Droid on my phone. I'm not failing, but I do. But I do have F-Droid on my phone. And someone could build that, but unfortunately, it's considerably more difficult to actually build a thing and deliver it to users than it is to just throw stones.
Mm-hmm. And just to circle back to, it runs as root. The Snapd, which orchestrates Snap installation and mediates the security and all the rest of it, yes, it runs as root. But the applications that are installed by Snaps, they don't run as root on your host operating system. They are containerized and isolated. So if you install a Snap, you don't have to trust the publisher in terms of what access to the system that you've just granted them. Unlike if you install one of the packages from the Debian or Ubuntu archive that I maintain, and it has maintainer scripts in it, you are trusting me not to own your machine, because for the time that package is being installed, I have root on your system.
Yes.
Should we talk about rolling releases?
So on the topic of rolling releases, Emil Johnson emailed us.
I use a rolling release for my laptop and love it. The main use of my laptop is to tinker with new technologies, try out programming languages, build fun stuff that scratches an itch, and so on. Basically nerdy software developing and sysadmin stuff. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed builds and runs automated QA on new packages as they come out, making sure that I have the latest dependencies that build and work reasonably well together. So, why should Ubuntu not be a rolling release? Enter my work MacBook that I use for my software development job. When doing my work, I don't want the latest dependencies. I want the same dependencies as everyone else and the deployment environment. Different distros solve different problems. If I understand Ubuntu, it wants to be my bread and butter work laptop more than my personal laptop for building new cool things.
So I would say you can have the best of both worlds with Ubuntu, because you don't have to pollute your host operating system with bleeding edge new bits of software to build new cool things. You can use containers, LXD, Docker or virtual machines in order to run up the new hot coolness environment that you need in order to build new and exciting things, maintaining the stability and integrity of your system.
Or you could do the opposite. You could run the bleeding edge and then have a VM with an LTS for doing all your builds.
Well, do you want to hear my actual solution to this? You'll like this.
Go on then.
Because I think you could actually do this. It would be not that much work, and it would satisfy everyone who wants a rolling release. Okay? So, you are aware, and I believe you've talked about on the show, how you can run you can run a, in quotes, rolling release by just always upgrading as soon as the new version comes out. So, but you upgrade to the in-development version. So when 2004 comes out, you upgrade to 2010. When 2010 comes out, you upgrade to 2104. And that's exactly how most people who work on Ubuntu itself do it. Mm-hmm. Because they need to be, right? So they're running the in-development version the whole time. So here is the solution. You invent a new Ubuntu version called Ubuntu Rolling Rhino or something, right? Suggestions for names on a postcard. And basically what Rolling Rhino does is it's got, that's its version number. So it's called, the version number is X.X or whatever, and its name is Rolling Rhino. And it has one extra package in it. And what that package does is when a new version comes out, it pokes your app sources. So it upgrades to the new version. And then if someone wants to be on Rolling Rhino, they just install that once, and then it takes care of doing the upgrade at release time. And other than that, they're on a rolling release the whole time. And that's all you have to do. Create that once. And then when someone says, but I need a rolling release for Ubuntu, say, then install Rolling Rhino. And then you never bothered again.
I will. I'm making notes for the next engineering team meeting.
I mean, normally this sort of idea wouldn't necessarily go anywhere, but it would be useful if one of us was the head of the Ubuntu desktop team, in my opinion. But I mean, I seriously feel like that could work. I mean, someone could do that right now, but they have to understand the concept of, this is much like the Ubuntu appliances we talked about in the last show, where if you want an Ubuntu appliance which runs Plex, for example, it's not that hard to download Ubuntu Core and install it and then snap install Plex server on it or Plex media server on it. But what you actually want is to go, I want the Plex thing, stick it on an SD card, done. This is the same thing. It's not technical, it's PR. To be able to say, I want the Ubuntu rolling release, and then when you go to the release versions, there's one in there, there's download 2004, download 1804, download 2010, and then at the bottom it says download Ubuntu Rolling Rhino. And it's literally just the Ubuntu build, but tweaked to when it detects a new version of the package, a new repository version, a new release version, to just upgrade to it. Always. Bosh, done. That doesn't seem that hard to me, and it would solve the problem entirely for people who demand a rolling release. Just tell them, run this, and then you're done.
And this is why every 18 months we get Stuart Langridge on the Ubuntu podcast to come and fix the world. So, Avinash Gunasi has also emailed us on this topic.
I think Ubuntu is perfect as it is. Whenever there are updates, I'm confident that it will not break my system, and I do not need to worry about package dependencies, as I know this will be taken care of by the team. As a normal non-technical user, it is liberating not to have to manage package dependencies. I did try a rolling distro last year, and I was asked to choose dependencies when updating or installing new apps. Being non-technical, I felt this was an extra burden.
I wholeheartedly agree with this person,
yes.
Personally. Thank you, Avinash, because, I'm still running 1804. I'm too chicken to even upgrade to the new version of the LTS. Well, I'm super conservative about this stuff because I need my machine to work. In the old days, when my job was in an office on someone else's computer or whatever, my computer was for fun. Right? So if it broke, what happened was I'd be annoyed about it and then rebuild it or change things or whatever. But now I'm reliant on my computer working. It's not a thing where I'm prepared to go, oh, the windowing system's broke, that's a problem, or to noodle about with the Wi-Fi or whatever. I don't care about any of that. I have things to do. And whether they're work things or things that I'm doing for fun, none of them are fiddling with the operating system itself. I just want that to work. Some people do like fiddling with the operating system. Fine, go for it, get stuck in. But I'm an LTS user like I think most Ubuntu users probably are.
So it sounds a bit like Rick agrees with Stuart's proposal.
I think renaming interim releases to rolling would be beneficial. Interim releases have a short support life and no multiple overlaps. These two facts mean you should only be running the latest release if you're not going for LTS.
What he's talking about there is only having LTS versions and a rolling version in between.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And I mean, Martin will have more of an opinion on this because this is literally his job to think about it. But again, having seen this from the inside some years ago, the interim releases are useful because they're essentially milestones.
Yeah.
Right. If you didn't have them and it was all a rolling release, you'd just create a milestone every 6 months and call it 2004 Alpha 1 anyway. Instead of it being 1904, it would just be called 2004 Alpha 2 because you still need that stop point to take account of where you are to make sure everything builds together at some point. Otherwise, you go 2 years. There was never any point at which there was actually a working distribution.
Right.
And then you've got to actually put a thing out that no one's ever really run successfully.
Yeah.
And there's a PR thing as well. And people blog about new interim releases and they do videos and they do all that sort of thing. And that wouldn't happen if you were just rolling for 2 years in between LTSs.
And I'll give you another good example of why we want to have, milestone releases in the interims. When we're working on features like ZFS support, we actually need to put out new installers that people use and install operating systems to make sure not those new features just don't build, but you can actually install the OS. You don't want to get to an LTS and go, oh, well, the installer doesn't work very well. That's unfortunate. You want to build some confidence in the technologies as you're going along. And Jason Armstrong is already rolling.
I am one of those who use Ubuntu as a rolling release, says Jason. I install the current release, then switch to the dist upgrade and update that over the next 6 months. I have read that this is a not very secure way to run my OS, but in the 4 years I've been enjoying Ubuntu, I haven't had a broken system yet. So he's already running Ubuntu Rolling Rhino.
Yes.
Which is great.
And there it is again. I've made a note of this name. I'll speak to Mark. Although I think I may have burned my Ubuntu naming credits with the Groovy Gorilla. So I might have to get somebody else to propose the Rolling Rhino. Right. And with that, thank you all for your feedback about snaps and rolling releases. We're going to move on to some command line love now.
If you love the command line as much as we do, send us a command that will blow our minds, and we might even mention it on the show. Send your command line love to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
So, Stuart, not only have you returned for a second week, but you've come with a command line love to share.
As I understood it, it was obligatory. It's a thing called ProseLint. And what it does is it reads, as far as I'm aware, only English text and points out problems with it. It's like a grammar checker. But instead of it being one of those grammar checkers that just whines about the passive voice, it's specific individual things. And the ProseLint people's shtick is that this is all taken from existing grammar guides or people's writing suggestions. So I've run it on a bunch of my things and it complains about the fact that I overuse the word very. And the message that it gives you points out that every time you use the word very, you should use the word damn instead. And then your editor will cut it out and your writing will be better than it was to begin with. And they're quoting someone like Hemingway. I don't think it was Hemingway, but something like that. But the point is they're working off that and they've got this big list of stuff. So it's called ProseLint because it does for English text what linting does for code. And the reason this came up is because both Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office and whatever the Apple thing is called have a thing which checks your text for sexist language, gendered language, things like that. And I thought that's useful. I wish that existed for LibreOffice. It doesn't. So I went poking around to see if it would be possible to build something like this for LibreOffice and using ProseLint as the back end, because that's one of the things it does warn you about. If you type chairman, it will just say to you, hey, that should be chairperson. And again, not making a big deal about it, but yeah, I'll make that change because it makes no difference to me. Good idea. Makes the text slightly more accessible to other people. Great, I'll do that. So I would have liked to see that built into LibreOffice, but building a LibreOffice extension, harder than it looks. But nonetheless, or more undocumented than it looks, perhaps I should say. But ProseLint exists. It's in the archives. Just apt install Python 3-ProseLint, or it's in Software Center, obviously. And then you just run ProseLint. It understands Markdown. It understands plain text. I'm not sure if it understands HTML. But I thought it was pretty cool.
That is nifty. Thank you for bringing that one along. And with that, we are going to move on to the regular feedback. So here it is. This is all your wonderful feedback that was not about snaps or rolling releases. So first, Joe, not that one, emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
If I wanted to help out the podcast but not become a Patreon sponsor, is it possible to just donate using PayPal? I'd prefer to make a single payment rather than several smaller monthly payments for a variety of reasons.
The answer to this question is yes, you can do that. So a couple of weeks ago, we've added to the website ubuntupodcast.org/donate. And on there is a link to the Patreon. And if you want to make single one-off payments to PayPal, there is a simple form that you can use to do that very thing. And we'd like to thank all of those of you that have done that and made a one-off payment with PayPal, and all of you who've backed us on Patreon. Thank you very much for your support. Mark, not that one, also emailed us.
If you want to draw an arrow or anything on your PC screen, perhaps try this GNOME extension called Draw on Your Screen, then use GNOME Screenshot or similar. So I think this is a callback to Alan talking about using Shutter for screenshots, because even though it's crusty old Perl,
right.
It lets you easily edit them and draw arrows on, like, to point at things that you're trying to highlight.
Right, so this is annotate your screen and then take a screenshot.
Yeah.
That's a cool idea.
As opposed to take the screenshot and then annotate the screenshot, which is
Right.
interesting, different concept. I mean, I think I'd rather the other way.
It's fun though. It'd be handy for screen sharing though. You could do screen sharing and annotate your screen.
It would be interesting to see whether these things show up in screen sharing. Because screen sharing has a nasty habit of just picking up on one particular window or whatever, and this exists in some kind of weird floaty plane over the top of your desktop. So,
Anyway, we will have a link to the Draw on Your Screen GNOME extension in the show notes. Barnabas also emailed us.
are there any plans, or at least chatter, to bring first-class Ubuntu support to the Pinebook Pro, similar to the type of support that's provided for Raspberry Pi?
So not by Canonical, as far as I'm aware. And I'm not sure that we really need to do anything, do we? Because the Pine community are epic, and they've got an army of developers enabling all of those Pine devices we spoke about in the last episode with various different distributions, some of which are Ubuntu based. Do we need official support?
Well, what's interesting there is Barnabas mentions first-class Ubuntu support, so I'd be interested to know what he's not seeing on Ubuntu on the Pinebook Pro that would be changed by Canonical to it. Is it just a question of that then it would be a bit more public that Ubuntu runs on it, or is there something specific which Canonical could provide which the Pine community have not?
That's a very good point. So, Barnabas, let us know what it is you're seeking for first-class Ubuntu support, and maybe we can dig into that a bit more in feedback in a later show. Scott Clark also emailed us.
I was just wondering if you guys could discuss the development of VR for Ubuntu. I have an Oculus Rift and have been waiting patiently for support for my headset. In your opinion, will OpenXR ever get to the point where we support the Oculus? Am I wasting my time waiting? Well, I will defer to my resident born-again PR champion, Martin Wimpress.
So I cancelled my order for VR equipment as lockdown and quarantine was starting at about that time, and I felt that wasn't the right time to make such a frivolous purchase. So the reason I left this question is I suspected that the three of us might not know the answer, but I am sure there are people in our audience that do know the answer. So if you know what the state of OpenXR support is in Linux in general and Ubuntu, and if you know of anyone in the community working on projects around that, please let us know, and maybe we can get Scott an answer. And Ralph emailed us.
I'd like to start installing Ubuntu 20.04, both server and desktop, on many devices. I have my own way of partitioning, and I don't want to install it by hand, manually, every single time. So I'd love to automate the whole installation. Based on my research, I've got the following options: a Red Hat Kickstart installation, Debian pre-seed, or just boot Ubuntu server or desktop, switch to a virtual console with Controller F2 and run something which will start installation. Pixie with DRBL is not an option since some devices won't be connected to any network. Could you please tell me which option I should choose and ideally point me to some example of how to use Kickstart or how to use Debian pre-seeds or what I should be running in my virtual console?
So my first thought when I read this question is to use Cloud Init, because that's something that runs when you prepare like an image, a base image, some of which for Ubuntu server, there are pre-installed images available with Cloud Init integrated. And then through some config files that you can manipulate, you can determine what your partitioning scheme should be, what your network configuration should be, and you can also tell it to kick off. It's got, it's extensible with things like Ansible and Chef and Puppet, and you can have it go off and run additional bits and pieces of your own that way. So my feeling was Cloud Init would probably be the better way to go. So Lucas Vardkist left a comment on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ubuntu podcast.
Coming from the perspective of someone who regularly works with both new and old coax networks, I have one thing to say. No. Most cable networks are made for sub 1 gigahertz. I would only ever consider this with fresh cables with objectively good terminations in distances not further than 5 meters. But that is if you only use cable with connections, not any TV sockets in between.
So this is in response to some feedback we had about using Mocha adapters to use coax to interconnect rooms over a LAN.
Yes.
What, instead of Cat5?
Or instead of home plug.
Yeah. So instead of running fresh Cat5 or home plug over your power cables, you run over your TV aerial cables.
Oh, the point is not that someone's building a new network and they're thinking about making it 10 base 2. It's they've already got a bunch of coax in the wall.
Right.
Yes, that's the idea.
Okay. Yeah, don't do that. I mean, Lucas is obviously an expert with this and says, don't do that. I'm not an expert. Don't do that.
Cat5 is not that expensive.
Raymond Coatsey left a comment on our website.
Mark is not alone with his experience at Lidl. And what this is about is Mark saying that you go into Lidl and you find that in the middle, so you buy all the food around the outside, and then in the big bins in the middle, you find yourself buying a socket set and a dinghy and a wardrobe and 1,000 little screwdrivers and a snowman and a snow globe and there's a chap called Mick McConnell. There's a video of him on YouTube singing the Ballad of Lidl and Aldi, and it's class, right?
Yeah.
This guy's in a bar called John B. Keynes in Listowel in County Kerry. And I've not been in this bar, but I've been in a whole bunch of Irish bars a lot like it. And this guy's gas. You have to listen to this song, right? It's really good.
So we will include a link to that video in the show notes for you all to enjoy. But it perfectly captures the weird middle zone of Lidl and Aldi.
And someone in our Telegram group found the same monitor, one standing by itself in their local Lidl. And so
excellent. Yeah, you have to listen. You have to listen to your man's song. It's class.
And finally, Jason Armstrong emailed ThinkPad Corner.
I use a ThinkPad P50. It's lovely. It has such a good keyboard. It even has the number pad on the side. Sadly, the speakers are terribly tinny, and even after having opened the laptop up and given it a good cleaning and dusting, I feel justified in continuing to use this ThinkPad as it was gifted to me from the recycle bin at my work by a friend in IT.
The P-series laptops are great, whatever the vintage. They're quality machines. I have a P1 currently. And with that wraps up all your feedback. Thank you all for sending it all in. We do read it all, but we can't read it all out. And that's all for episode 14. Thank you all for listening. And thank you, Stuart, for joining us again and stepping in to cover for Alan. We really appreciate that.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me on.
Brilliant. So if you would like to send your feedback in, you can email us at show@ubuntupodcast.org. You can talk to us between shows in our Telegram channel, ubuntupodcast.org/Telegram. If you would like to help us with our production costs, then you can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/ubuntupodcast. And if you are looking for a fine VPS, then head to bitfolk.com, who've been powering our VPS for 13 years. It's been upgraded from Ubuntu 6.06 to 18.04. That VPS is brilliant. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll speak to you next time.